All right. So today we have Vera here with us. She's a senior technology and policy advisor at Technology for Global Security, and she's also a recognized leader driving strategy at the intersection of global threats, policy, emerging tech, and innovation, as well as organizational strategy and operations. Vera also is a recognized expert on Russian influence and disinformation and is here to talk about her recent op-ed on the New York Times, as well as other interesting topics including misinformation, disinformation, and women in leadership. Thanks for being here, Vera.
Thanks for having me on, Alexa.
Yeah, greatly appreciated. All right. So I guess we'll get rolling maybe with some personal questions. We're all surviving out here, in this crazy time. What are your go-tos for dealing with all the madness?
This has been, it's funny. On one hand, I want to say this has been sort of like an unprecedented time with just everything that's going on in the world, and then trying to manage sort of your careers as well as work-life balance, as well as your family as well. But just to put it in perspective a little bit, if I think about our parents' generations, and I'm originally not, I'm a naturalized citizen, wasn't born in this country, and think about what sort of previous generations in different countries had to go through. Like, I mean, given the access of technology and given everything that we have, we can't take that for granted. But, I would say, for a lot of working parents, this has been pretty challenging, particularly having kids at home, especially those, my kids are in elementary school, so the distance learning part of it, and then trying to have moments of sanity and having moments of self-care while you're trying to juggle your career and professional, priorities and so forth. I mean, I think a lot of parents can probably attest to having kids pop up in their meetings or in their documents even. And, that's just kind of part of what it is. I think it's just kind of, I think we all need to appreciate that. And if you will, just kind of be easy on ourselves. Be easy on ourselves and kind of lower the expectations of what can and cannot be accomplished as well.
Yeah, definitely. As you've been just juggling all these things with working from home now and having your kids at home, being a mother, being a wife, being a, professional and a leader in all of these various sectors, what's been the most unexpected moment during this stay-at-home order?
Well, on the kid front, I've been really amazed at how fluent my 10-year-old has become in using technology, to the point where now she, her distance learning is on Google, on sort of the Google Suite, and she has discovered Google Hangout feature. So in the middle of my meetings or when I'm trying to concentrate and do work, she is G-chatting with me throughout the day. And so it's things like that that has been, kind of like little things like that I think has been unexpected. But you just need to kind of orient the kids back to it. But again, expectations have to be managed accordingly in terms of what we can and cannot get done right now.
100%. I think that we're all experiencing that on the various, Zoom meetings that are coming up. Everyone's seeing the real behind the scenes of what we are all going through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we have our first question in. It says, I'd be interested in hearing Vera's ideas on what the U.S. should be doing to defend itself from what are clear disinfo attacks from other nations. Offense?
I mean, look, it's a multifaceted problem that requires a multifaceted solutions and approach to addressing it. For one, yes, there's two parts of it. When you're dealing with foreign interference and disinformation coming from foreign actors, be it Russia, China, Iran, you name it. If we're talking specifically about state actors, yes, there's certain, laws that we can place, certain things that we can do in terms of protecting our infrastructure. But and then also, without a question, partnering and working with the platforms and with the tech community as well. But so to the point that I made in the Times piece,
Mm-hmm.
they can only exploit us because we have somewhat weakened institutions, because our society is somewhat fractured right now. So it goes back to, and no, it's not going to be on the, yeah, that's why they can exploit those, vulnerabilities, that exploit those fissures in the society. So that's not, whether it's, a potential foreign interference or disinformation coming from Russia, or, a partisan figure, an individual, or, a lone wolf who might, potentially may want to carry out a terrorist attack. It doesn't matter who, as long as we have these fissures and as long as we have these, under sort of challenges in our society, that's what, we need to address those first and foremost. So it's not just about, attacking or sort of addressing, or going after the adversaries themselves. So that's why I'm saying it has to be a multifaceted approach. And then the other piece is, we really have to think about what we as individuals can do. It's like what I said in the piece, is that we have enormous amount of power and enormous amount of responsibility. There's a lot of tools out there and a lot of resources out there in terms of fact checking and, how do you seek out credible information. They're fantastic. But it's up to us, and we should be using those tools, but it's also up to us as individuals to see if we're potentially seeing misinformation, disinformation. Is that headline kind of sensationalized, or does this seem a little off? And if we open that article or that content, do we really want to share it? Do we really want to forward it? And also, by the way, it's not just on social media. Disinformation and misinformation travels through friends and family, as well, because that's sort of our familiar territory as well. So my point is, we need to make sure as individuals that we educate ourselves in terms of the credibility information, in terms of fact checking the information, and really critically think. So again, there's multiple pieces in getting after this problem, not just say that potential offensive capability may not be or may need to be exercised, but this is a multifaceted problem that truly, truly, truly requires a multifaceted solution. And one that, by the way, it's not, again, there's an individual component, there's of course the tech component, and there's sort of the government and civil society component. And also, last thing I'll say, government side, it's not just federal, it's not just cyber sort of offensive operations. A lot of this stuff also is happening at the federal at the state and local level as well. So again, working with the local partners on how to deal with that, that's also critical. But, yeah.
Right, the congruence of all these actors, for sure.
Yeah, but you cannot forget, again, my personal view is it's onerous to simply focus on the actors themselves without really trying to understand how to actually solve for some of the issues and some of the divisions happening in our society. And one thing that COVID has done, it has pointed out how fractured our society is on so many levels.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of COVID and everything going on right now, what do you think is going to be the biggest impact on the upcoming elections? Or just maybe elections in general going forward from here on out?
It's, I think there's two big impacts. One is, what do we actually believe? One of the reasons I wrote that piece in the Times is, on top of the typical disinformation and misinformation conspiracy theories out there, they usually are associated with, elections and, partisan takes, whether it's on the economy, foreign policy, healthcare, social issues, whatever you name it. You have this infodemic piece on top of this that is it really, when you compound it together and then you think about the US election, in exactly how you said, all the other global elections that are going to happen after the United States, critical elections with our partners and allies, that it's the congruence of that. And it's not just one actor potentially causing harm or spreading disinformation, misinformation, but it's, again, the congruence of actors and congruence of different types of information. So that's one of the things that scares me. But when you add this COVID element to it, the impact, it's one is the credibility. What is credible and what is not, whether you can actually go in person and vote. What is going to happen to mail-in voting? How it's sort of the process of voting, I think is going to be sort of, one aspect. What about also depends on the process and how people choose to vote and whether they're able to do early voting and whether actually be able to go in person and of course exercise hygiene, likely physical distancing and other measures that may likely still be in place. What happens because of the different type of voting that we may be doing and may look a little bit different come November, the actual result that are we really going to, this is a real question. I don't know the answer to it. Are we actually going to know the result and the outcome of the election that night? Maybe, but maybe not. So think about the scenario if we may not know right away. And then you have across the media landscape, potential projections and theories flying around there of who the winner is. And it's not just at the presidential level, also at the congressional level and at the state level, gubernatorial level, and so on and so forth. So, but again, I think this is all amplified because we're also now thinking about the health and safety precautions that we now have to be thinking about and the impact that it's going to have. And I do think, depending on some of the lessons, what the outcome, not just the outcome of the election, but the process of it will be in November, that may potentially set a precedent for, in really lessons learned for some of the other global elections. And it also is a good thing, I think, both from on the political side, from the candidates to platforms, how they should be dealing with this, to state and local officials. Again, globally, there will be a lot of, I think, lessons learned on how to deal and how to actually vote and carry out election during a pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Can we, you mentioned infodemic, that's something that's been thrown around. Just for everyone out there that's not, really saturated into these issues on the day-to-day, could you just give some brief definitions? What's the difference between misinformation, disinformation, and then an infodemic?
So the way I think, so this is a great question. The way I think about disinformation is disinformation has the ability for an actor to spread lies, conspiracy theories, and half-truths, if you will, but with intent. There's an intent behind it. So that's why I'll call it, there's malign intent, if you will. Misinformation, it's, if you will, benign, the best way to call it. An actor, whether it's an individual or an organization, may be spreading it, but there's not this kind of malicious or malign intent to spread it. And to me, the infodemic is the use of a pandemic and to really spread conspiracy theories, half-truths, lies, and so on and so forth about the actual pandemic itself. And unfortunately, and arguably, it has been spreading in some cases much faster than the actual pandemic itself, because it's viral. And it's viral not just because, again, it's not just because of social media, but COVID is dominating all airways, right? It's radio, it's TV, it's print, it's friends and family who, many are freaked out about how do they act, what do they do, and the effect on the economy. It's everywhere. So you can't just point to one source of spread. And of course, foreign actors, as we've also been seeing. So it's everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. Going back now to, you had kind of talked about what can we rely on? What can people even really trust to be verified information? On that same kind of note, even though individuals rely on their government to protect them, can't we not expect people to figure this all out on their own? Do you think that the US government should be using cyber command to attack or hack back at some of these, actors, malign actors?
I mean, maybe it should always have that as an option and as a tool, but again, it can not be as the only tool in the toolbox that it uses. Not to say that about, and the reason is because, first of all, yes, particularly a state actor, and we've seen this in other countries, can go after our infrastructure, and you can have this sort of a hybrid situation where you have, the disinformation and misinformation spread in addition to full-on cyber offensive, yes, in going after infrastructure that can happen. So it's part of the toolkit, but not one where it's the only toolkit. That's not something I would say, let's, go lead with it, again, without addressing some of the other elements that are in play here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important for us to even be able to recognize. I think that sometimes citizens, we don't realize what exactly exists in the toolkit that's even available and our potential options that can be taken.
For sure.
What do you see as the hallmark of leadership in COVID-19? Crisis enables us all to consider the importance of leadership. What's really struck you as successful leadership traits during this time?
So there was an article about, and this is interesting. There was an article circulated about women leadership during COVID, in particular, the hallmark to me, and she's, I think, phenomenal. The Prime Minister of New Zealand is one. But I've seen also men be great leaders as well. So it's not just a woman, but the couple of traits that I think that have really stood out. And I think these are also just general hallmark of leadership, but especially in COVID. One, that you put the health and safety of the people first. You listen and you lead with empathy. I mean, that empathy piece is critical, because no matter what business decision or political decision you make, you're thinking about the customers, you're thinking about your society, you're thinking about the people. The other piece that I think is really important, and it's one thing that COVID has taught us, unlike if you think about some of the earlier crises that we've had as a society, is the importance of planning, and also importance of thinking about the future. And a lot of us in the field, we think about sort of have done futures analysis and really thinking about sort of what potential scenarios might be, what should we anticipate. And, it's a very important tactic, and it's important to do this for a reason, because it enables organizations to plan and enables leaders to really come up with those contingency operations and carry and have those plans in place. So I think, especially in a crisis like this, anticipating of what's next, thinking about sort of having those contingency plans and operations and plans, and how you're also going to carry out them. That's really important. But at the end of the day, it's the empathy piece for me, the empathy and service.
Do you see maybe as a result of this crisis do you see potentially voters maybe valuing empathy more now when they're making their choices for elections?
I hope so. I hope so. It's, when we think about great, especially if we think about elections, political leaders, and I don't mean just presidential, at all state levels, who can lead the society, who can lead the country, who can lead the state, who can think about all different types of people, or country, all different types of people that live there, who can be that, we say, in the national security community, we say commander in chief, right? And it's not just for addressing foreign policy, national security challenges, but the economic side of the equation, the pandemic side of the equation as well. So that's part of it, but also as part of it is empathy has to be the ability to be empathetic to the people that you lead, listen to them, listen to the concerns, and being able to incorporate that into the strategy and the plans. I think it's going to be one of the hallmarks. And I also don't think it's going to be one of those things just for political leaders. I think this is something that's super critical for business leaders, for startups, for technology companies as well, to be able to incorporate those values and how they serve their customers and how they serve their users as well.
So recently I was reading this piece by Mark Anderson called How to Build. And it really got me thinking. I saw some ties to, your op-ed from the New York Times and some of your recommendations of what we can be doing. But there's still this question around opportunity. What may be some of the opportunities that come as a result of this very tumultuous time?
I think I actually really like this piece. I'll tell you why. I think this is an opportunity for entrepreneurs, for VCs, for Silicon Valley, get together with governments, with civil society, and really during the COVID time, come up with products, with services that what I would call them net positive, that are better for the humanity, that are addressing all of these different challenges, whether it's how do you improve testing when dealing with pandemics, how do you actually, dealing with the impact of disinformation, whatever it is. But again, the pieces of it is not just a product, or how do you improve distance learning, and how do you ensure that children from K through 12 are able to spot misinformation and disinformation, get those critical thinking skills through their distance learning programs. I mean, this is just, I'm completely, spitballing here from the top of my head. But the idea is, I think right now there is enormous amount of opportunity. What I also think is, I get the sense that there are people who are not just ready to create, but also partner. So there may be, I think, some VCs that might be interested in some of this, also government institutions, and partnering also with civil society. But again, creating products, creating services that are really going to be better for the mankind and for the global society. I think this is I can potentially see a surge for this. So again, it's a challenging time for all, but I would almost urge people when they're they are stressed out, or maybe they're waking up in the middle of the night or in their shower, right, and have that aha moment, seize on that, don't just say, I cannot do this, right. Maybe there is a way that you can.
No, 100%. And I think that's something we've seen, crisis throughout history. The people that, maintain and make it through are those that look for those small wins, small ways that you can make it through, for sure.
Yeah. And then there's small ways that you can make a difference. That's the other thing, yeah, right? You don't have to have all of the resources in the world to do that. You can partner potentially with folks that may have that, or may be able to help you. But I think the key thing is to take that initiative.
How do you think that the nature of global information sharing will change? We've seen a lot of healthy global collaboration on COVID-19. Can we expect these relationships to continue to flourish in the future?
I hope so. I think that's one of the things that have been positive across the board, that there is a absolutely greater information sharing. It's not perfect. And it's not just information sharing across both the tech and the government side, the federal and state and local, allies and that kind of thing. But I hope it does continue, and I hope we can actually carry it out to other issues, to other challenges that we're trying to address as well. So I'm hoping that this is a momentum, and this will be one of the things that we take away for however long that we're in this new normal, into other challenges that we may face.
To that end, what do you think are the cyber priorities once we come out of this crisis?
To me, it's going to be ultimately, for cyber priorities, how do we secure our critical infrastructure? Because particularly what I'm most worried about is, there's a couple actually. The first is the infrastructure piece. What I'm most worried about is the ability of an actor to be able to carry out a hybrid warfare type campaign, that they're using the classic information operation tactics that we talked about earlier, with the disinformation info and other tools and their blind influence tools in their toolbox that are not even online, everything from culture to business and local practices, to actually, in combination with cyber attacks on everything, our virtual capabilities, so on our physical infrastructure, the hospital. So on the hospitals, different types of infrastructures, and I use that word loosely, that we have. That's what I'm particularly worried about going in the future. I think voting, in the election infrastructure is also part of it. But considering when we're dealing in the pandemic, those are the things that I'm particularly worried about. The other thing that I think in terms of cyber priorities is how do we work with our allies and partners to train them to respond to these types of challenges and to these types of threats. And I think that's key, to be able to not just level the playing field, but those, we in the United States cannot do everything by ourselves, nor should we. And having those strong alliances and partnerships are key and critical to our success and to our national security. So then how do we ensure that it's part, especially in the cyber domain, which is still this nebulous domain, that we have, we actually train and partner with our allies and partners that they become, if you will, part of our coalition for these kind of challenges as they come up.
Right. So the cyber domain is definitely becoming, one of those theaters that maybe weren't previously recognized to have the same potentially global effects.
Absolutely.
I think.
Absolutely.
So, we know that you are a recognized expert on all things Russia, all things disinformation accordingly.
I wouldn't say that. No one is a, I feel like expert is a loaded word, there's plenty to learn and plenty to consider, so I appreciate for the compliment, but
you've done some really salient work, and I know you did following the 2016 election too. Some of our listeners are curious about your experience naturally. How do you see COVID giving the Russians new opportunities to get a leg up on the United States? Or do you think that COVID is negatively impacting them dramatically as well?
I think it's certainly impacting them. I think it's impacting all countries. It's just impacting all countries differently. So in terms of the opportunities, there's two very obvious ones. One, to what I mentioned earlier, is this was in 16, and I think it's actually even more so now in 2020. And COVID really highlighted this, is how divided we are as a society. It's not just divisions. I'm not just saying, Democrats, Republicans, liberal, conservative, but, across science, across, the economy, all aspects. I'm not just talking about the partisan side of it. And so, there's, in some ways, they almost have like this fertile ground when you have a society. We're talking about the United States, but again, it can be applicable to other parts of the world here as well, that have these, if you will, vulnerabilities that, one needs to address. Otherwise, you're going to continue to have a situation. And then the other aspect of this, yes, they can and may create their own content and push certain narratives, and also do it in a way that it could potentially proliferate offline, where you have, we saw this in 16, we'll see how this shapes up in 2020, where you have, rallies are being organized, basically different things that are being taken so offline. But the other thing is, there's so much conspiracy theories and disinformation and misinformation that's like made in America, that's originating here by whether it's again by partisans or on particular issues. So an actor like Russia, what they really need to do is just amplify it further. They don't need to create a new original content. So that's another way. And then the third way, again, when we think about different tools of malign influence, let's not only talk about disinformation and misinformation. Let's talk about business assets and opaque media ownership. Let's talk about the political aspect of it, the cultural aspect of it. So there's, again, and that's where I say it's not just the online, but the potential to go offline, and the piece that what worries me the most, and we're already seeing this in the COVID, and that certainly an actor like Russia can exploit, is the potential to cause real world harm when it actually proliferates to the offline form.
Yeah, I think that we definitely are seeing multiple ways in which the online is increasingly blurring with the offline physical world.
Totally.
Obviously, we saw that with protests or rallies surrounding 2016 that were
and then they are, if you think about Putin and Russia in general, not Russia in general, Putin in the leadership, really, they're strategic actors. There's strategy behind their thinking. If what works before, they may continue and do it again. But if other things work, like amplifications, like all these fissures that they don't even have to do much about it, they're going to adapt and pick up potentially new ways of doing things.
Right. So we're actually receiving a little bit of pushback, saying, aren't the Russians also suffering badly right now, though?
Yes.
Can Putin really pull anything off right now?
Look, that's a fair point. They are suffering, they are suffering badly. But again, I think you have to think about sort of for an actor like Russia, sort of their end game overall and what may or may not present as an opportunity. And again, also how easy or how challenging it is to carry something out. That's why I say right now, with the possibility for amplification, and because so much of it is actually being made in America, that it's not like, you don't have to do a whole lot to be a destabilizing force.
Right. Makes sense. The path of least resistance is the one that will
absolutely. Yes. Exactly.
So tying back, you had mentioned, how startups at one point in this conversation, some of our listeners are saying it sounds like a lot of the DoD focused startups are critically at risk of failure because of funding potentially drying up. What's really the reality of that matter? Could you give an inside look?
Well, I mean, I don't know in terms of the funding, drying up for DoD startups. My sense is when it comes to the DoD, to the Defense Department or really U.S. government in general, the missions are going to continue. There are going to need to be investments that are going to have to be made in the space to, whether it's part of the warfighting function, whether it's to improve stability, whether it's on the influence side of things, whether it's even on healthcare, on the health and science end of things, or cyber, as we talked earlier about. So my sense is that is actually a growing industry overall. Certainly during the COVID, during the pandemic, we may need to adapt a bit, but my sense over, again, just thinking just more broadly on a macro level, it's not going to just fully dry up. I think because the missions have to, this is really important work and the missions have to continue.
Right. We would hope that they're not just set up to dry up and at the.
I mean, again, and then also sort of, the incorporation of technology, right? Incorporation of emerging technology and the ability to use that technology to address these challenges, whether it's, again, specifically when we're talking about DoD, but also for good. Again, to be able, again, like when you asked me the question about the article about how to build, it's creating organizations, creating companies that can benefit the humanity and society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important. Sometimes it seems that people are either on one side of the coin or the other with tech, either being bad or all good. And, we all need to recognize and stretch ourselves to realize it's not all bad. It's not all good. There's push and pull to each.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, for the quirks that are bad or the things that need to be corrected, these are lessons learned. Like, what I found is, companies are taking it to heart. They are learning whatever needs to be learned and adopting and adjusting, whether it's on the technological side, on the product side, and even in their growth plans and the people side of things, and then but the one thing across the board is those that are very mission driven and surface driven, their mission is not really changing. They're in there for, I don't want to say for the right mission, but kind of it is, they have that kind of the for good aspect right, built in. So some of the different aspects of technology can be, modified, but again, this is an opportunity to create something that will be potentially net positive.
Which is comforting to hear for sure, especially from someone with experience on both sides of the house. What sort of industry change could come out of this crisis in the tech sector? More work from home, more dispersed workplace spaces, etc. And I think that this was in reference to, some of the more negative sides of what we're seeing, perhaps, what's been advertised with Zoom bombing, things like this. Is what this question's in reference to.
So I actually think COVID or this time is proving to be a good lesson learned of how to do distributed workforce and how to manage a distributed workforce and sort of the work from home. I think I potentially see more of it and more companies offering, a hybrid model. I think there's a lot of benefits to it, but yes, there are downsides, and the downside is like, how do we secure our communications, our infrastructure in such a way that enables that to happen as well. So I think that, again, some kinks to be worked out, but I do see sort of a scenario moving forward. And I actually think it may be not just the tech sector, but across different sectors of society where the work from home model or hybrid model may be adopted a little bit more. Of course, it cannot work for every industry. Some folks just have to go in. But to the degree that those who have that option, I think I can see that being, an option. And also beyond sort of the security, yes, there's security kinks to work out. Offer folks more flexibility. Imagine in major metropolitan cities, how much time was spent commuting, how much time I was spent, on the road, and those, who have those parents or have elderly parents of children, or elderly parents, or other outside of work responsibilities, broadly speaking, that it takes them away from that aspect as well, given sort of the nature of the transportation side of things and actually physically getting to work. So I see a trend there.
With the possibility, that, or the unknown of how long people that can work from home will be, do you see this affecting democratic institutions, political participation in general, and how that could actually have extenuating effects on the upcoming election?
It may. But I think a way to do that, I think a way to address it is really, and I'm anticipating and I'm hoping that state and local officials are already working on this, is how do we ensure we have the procedures in place? How do we, that whether it's, voting by mail, whether giving access information, maybe it's webinars on their, and just getting the information out to people so they know, not just how to vote, but all of the different options that are available for them. I think that is going to be sort of a key part to addressing this. And again, I think it has to come, from state and local. And I imagine that we're also going to see this from advocacy groups as well. The one aspect that when you think about democratic institutions, and this is a thing that's across the board, as not one entity versus another, is in this time when we're working from home and we're at home or for the foreseeable future, for however long it will be, is ensuring that everyone has access to internet and has connectivity access, particularly marginalized, not just those that, this is again, talk about this kind of disparity, but not just, those who can and can afford to have access, but also marginalized communities. And, whether it's across the ethnic lines or across the income lines, or in rural areas, having that is a thing across the board, and that illuminates in and of itself a potential gap. But as we're at home more, having that access is something I think that's going to be really important to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I think that access is something we haven't really brought up today. I think that deserves its whole own Ask Me Anything for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
We can talk forever about how COVID is really bringing to light. It's highlighting some of these access issues that have been existing for a long time, but
That's exactly it.
Pass over. Yeah,
that is exactly it. And again, this is to my early point. I think what COVID is showing is some of these like fundamental issues in our society that don't really have to do with health or science, don't have to do anything with interference per se, but people are actually able to get information, then think about credible information, right? Or being able to access. So again, it's like, providers as well as federal, state, and local government have to work together to make sure that across the board, people have access to information. And then we can talk about the different, webinars, the different services that various institutions should or are able to provide. And how do people vote? And how do they learn about the candidates? All of the things that we've been talking about. But, that's, again, just to give an example of one of the issues that I think is sort of that fundamental issue that's out there. And again, we're talking about United States because we have an election coming up in November. Imagine, to my earlier point, that there's going to be elections across the world. There's disparities in these kind of vulnerabilities and what I call root cause issues in different parts of the world. And there's so many people in developing countries and emerging economies who don't have access to the internet, that state actors, or not just state actors, they're just different malign actors can actually exploit that as well. Or it's censored or it's controlled, right? It can be different, one way, whether it's access or it's actually controlled by the government, whether or not they have access or not, or what information they actually consume and see. So again, what we're dealing with, COVID is affecting globally, pretty much, but when we're focusing on the United States, I think there's just going to be lessons learned here across the board.
100%. Well, thank you. I know we've taken up a lot of your time. I'm just going to ask one more question because I know that we have a handful of young listeners on this.
Yeah.
Have really been affected with their huge life choices have been affected by the current pandemic. Do you have any words of advice on what to say, with internships perhaps being let go, job offers being rescinded, people being, not even young people, just everyone in general being, let go from jobs? Do you have any words on that?
Yeah, of course. I'm so happy you raised this. First of all, this is a crazy, crazy time on this. And I know, and I understand, and I've been there too, different parts of my career when you're, planning and hoping for something and for circumstances completely out of your control, it just does not pan out. This is when, I would strongly urge people, instead of going inwards, utilize your network, reach out to people. Even if you don't think you have a big network, guess what? You probably have. Utilize your friends, utilize your parents and your family. Obviously LinkedIn and social media, but you never know. There may be some models in the future. There may be some, virtual internships that people can do, things that people can do, even consulting before they can, maybe there was a job offer that they were thinking about, or a job that they were lining up post-college. That now is being put on hold because of drop in funding or a pause or a freeze. Okay, but there's things that potentially you can do and contribute. And then the other thing that I would say, especially for younger people, be part of the solution. I think don't just say that young people I would say actually across the board, not just young people, and even much older people have a lot of novel and interesting ideas. Talk about to what we were talking about, the building and creating. So put your ideas out there. Write that op-ed, write that blog, put that Twitter feed, or Facebook post, whatever. Put your thoughts and ideas out there. This is a time to generate content, to generate your own thought leadership. It will only help you. It won't hurt you. So there's another thing that I think that you can do to just keep the momentum going. And again, reach out. I think you'd be surprised at how many folks would be more eager and willing to help. And I think it's part of our responsibility. The last thing I'll say is leaders and up and coming leaders and executives in this field, whether you're on the tech side, on the government side, or policy side, to very much pay it forward. And I think a lot of people, young people, will find out that a lot of people are more than happy to do that.
Yeah, that's very encouraging, I know, to a lot of people out there. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us to talk about all these issues, to give your insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me.
Yeah, sounds good.
Take care.